Hello, everybody. As you can see from the Boomer office background behind me, I am traveling this week. So here is a compilation of our favorite extracts from roasts from the last few weeks that we hope you enjoy. I'll see you next week.
So, should we dive into the first profile?
Let's do it.
All right, awesome. So we have a 28-year-old African-American. Goal is to apply in round 1, 2026. Also applying to other programs, etc. Recently, 28-year-old black male. Okay, GMAT, 720 on the old GMAT, which is respectable. I think we agree. Undergrad, bachelor's in environmental science, 2.8 GPA, John, from a smaller public university in New Jersey. Worked 2 jobs to pay for school while treating autoimmune disorder. Okay, graduate studies, master's in sustainability management with a much higher GPA of 3.8 from a well-known school. Again, full-time student while working full-time. Work experience, 4 years of work experience. Started off in environmental consulting, recruited to work for an engineering firm, now landed in environmental health and safety for manufacturing. Position title is specialist. Responsibilities are that of a manager. Environmental reporting, sustainability metrics, zero waste initiatives, health and safety, etc. Currently making 97K comp. Okay, extracurriculars. Active participant in my historically black fraternity with many various volunteering events to give back to the community. Also own a boutique exotic reptile breeding business, John. Hope you're not scared of snakes. I cannot think of anything worse than breeding snakes, but it's just me. Why MBA? Accelerated path to senior sustainability roles in ESH strategy, corporate responsibility and operations leadership. Schools, I've actually already been accepted, interesting, into a lesser known MBA program in New Jersey. However, I noticed that the value comes from recruiting, from T15 programs. So basically targeting, sounds like T15, but is very aware of the low undergrad GPA. There's a connection to Columbia via some friends by the looks of it. Targeting maybe Yale, think about Yale, maybe think about Fuqua, NYU Stern. Okay. And no specific questions being asked, but really profile evaluation is what he wants here. John, why don't we start high level? How do you see this profile?
I like this profile overall. I'm not going to lie, that reptile business has intrigued me a little bit. But we'll go through that. Academically, look, everything in this profile is telling me to forgive that 2.8 GPA. Dealing with a valid illness, working 2 jobs to pay their way through college, and a 3.8 master's to make up for it. But a 2.8 is still a 2.8, Sam. And even if that optional essay works the hardest that it could ever do, no miracle can repent for a 2.8 GPA. And you'll note that many of the top schools have published their full ranges. And so that let that be a guide. So academics, I have concerns.
Offset maybe by a 720 though, right?
Yeah. I think that 720 definitely helps, as well as that 3.8 masters. So academic is concerned. Professional, I love the environmental angle. I like that there is, OP has some leadership component to what they do. But when it comes to vocational type roles, it obviously will be critical to bring out more analytical and strategy type work, which I don't really see articulated. And we can talk about that later, Sam. I'm going to also talk a little bit about that reptile breeding business as well. Demographically, underrepresented for sure. Goals, I love the callback to the current work and staying in the sustainability sector. I think, it would behoove OP to look at a role that would benefit from an MBA program, making sure that, an MBA is what's needed, or at least could greatly benefit and lead to and drive success in that role. And, all things considered, that's a good school list. I think Yale will be a great fit for OP. But that GPA is going to be the biggest question, the biggest red mark in their profile.
Let's address that elephant in the room then, or the snake in the room. 2.8 GPA. I did a little bit of research before our session started, and to kind of give viewers some context about why John and I are so worried about this. As John mentioned, some programs publish the GMAT, the GPA range. Not many, actually. I was surprised. Back in the day, you used to see this quite a lot, but fewer now. But Booth, for example, so M7, right up there, Chicago Booth, do publish the GPA range. And as you can see, the lowest GPA of their entire class last year was a 2.36. Now, we're talking about a 2.8 for this profile, which is, captured sort of within that range. So what John and I are saying is it can be done, but you can guarantee that people at the bottom of this GPA range have got some exceptional stuff compensating for it. A strong GMAT, strong GPA, GRE, masters, as John said, can help, other qualifications, and just generally a strong profile aside from the GPA. So this gives you some ideas, some context. And I think the highlight, the key thing here is that the average is a 3.6. So you can think if you've got at the top end, you've got a 4, and everybody above a 3.6, so 3.6 to 4 is offsetting everybody that is 3.2 to 3.6, then anything below 3.2 is very, very exceptional and very, very difficult. And so that's why we're so focused on this. So, John, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about, well, just quickly, what that optional essay would look like. So OP has some very clear, excuses, for want of a better word, why he got that GPA. Talk to us, tell us what an optional essay might look like to kind of mitigate that as much as can be done in an optional essay.
Yeah, great push, Sam. I think, look, starting any essay with addressing, dear admissions committee, my 2.8 undergraduate GPA is not reflective of my ability to handle the rigors of an MBA program. I would like to provide, a context for why my GPA is below expectations, and then that's when OP would talk about their medical issues, as well as not having the time to be able to devote to academic studies. And then, after explaining what has driven that low GPA, offer up evidences of how, they're able to succeed in an MBA program, right? I would like to provide evidence of having succeeded in my master's with a 3.8 GPA, and maybe point to specific classes within the master's where he got an A, preferably the ones that are quantitatively focused, and then also point to their 720 GMAT, right? And then if there are other ways to bring that out, whether it's analytical work at their work, at their job, well, that's everything's fair game there. And, if during the undergrad there was a trend line, whether senior year they had a higher GPA and whether they had some relatively strong grades, that's also worthy to mention as well. So plenty to work with here, Sam, in terms of in this optional essay.
Nice. So I think boiling that down, here's what happened, here's what I learned, and here's evidence that I'm doing better now.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Okay, cool. Let's talk about this previous admit. The comment in here, schools. I've been accepted into a lesser known MBA program in New Jersey. My thoughts, John, as I see this, is it's kind of encouraging because OP is getting admitted somewhere. So there's a bit of to me, that's saying, okay, good, you're onto something here. No mention of any scholarship there, though. That would have been even more encouraging. How do you think OP would want to be adapting this lesser known MBA application to an M7? Like, what is he going to take away from that he's going to use? What might need to change? Any thoughts?
I think you're looking at pretty much a similar process. I think the stakes are just much higher with an M7 program. And so devoting more time to the optional essay, making sure you have a stronger narrative, tightening up those goals. I think everything just dialed up a notch, Sam. I think that's how I would approach it. I think, OP has had experience applying to an MBA program. I think that confidence will help when it comes to everything from asking about recommendations and the interview process. But yes, I would imagine everything has to be dialed up.
Yeah, my thoughts on this are you could have got away with dropping the ball in that last application in a couple of areas. Like maybe your goals didn't have to be watertight, or one of your recommendations isn't that good, and you've still got the admit. If you're going to get into M7, you need to seal those gaps, and you need to make sure your entire app is bulletproof. I think that's sort of my main takeaway. Okay, John, let's get on to this reptile breeding business. So I guess this is OP has put this in the extracurriculars section, and it makes it sound like this is something he's doing more for fun than for funding to make money. How could he use this to his advantage? What are some of the traits that this conveys? How is an adcom going to see this extracurricular?
This is an unconventional one, and I have some thoughts, but I also want to, preface this with a example LinkedIn headline. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, go for it.
How taming iguanas and lizards taught me about cross-functional management. But in all seriousness, I think there's an opportunity for OP to connect this somehow to their sustainability and environmental angle. I don't think this should be, I'm rearing them for their skins so I can make leather and sell them to, the highest bidder. I think that's going to be tough to for anyone to swallow. But I think there's an opportunity to make this interesting. I think there has to be, how does this help make the world a better place angle to this reptile breeding? I don't know what exactly this would look like, but OP has an opportunity here. What are your thoughts, Sam?
Yeah, it might not be for the skins, to be fair. It might be for pets. And there might be an argument that he's doing it in a more sustainable or eco-friendly or animal-friendly way than others. And there might even be a story there. Like, I discovered this world of immoral breeding of iguanas or whatever it may be, and I decided to do it in a more humane way. And I'm setting up this business, putting in place new processes, new standards to do that in a way that you can then feed into the whole environmental health and safety theme. I think that could be a positive in that way if handled well. Interesting. Okay. And so I guess the point here that I want to emphasize is that topics like this, which could be perceived by some people as immoral, or some people's values might go against some people's values. That doesn't mean you can't write about it. Just be sensitive to how some people are going to perceive these things, and make sure you kind of write about it in a mature way that comes across as conscious and aware of these sensitivities. Okay, good.
I think OP has the best of intentions when it comes to reptile breeding, so I'd be willing to give OP the benefit of the doubt. There is a spectrum, right? You have folks who work in, maybe for cigarette companies, you have folks who work in alcohol, and if you work for like a Moet Hennessy, no one's telling you you're promoting alcoholism, right? It's a job's a job. And so I think I think it's all about perspective. It's all about context. And I think, especially with this environmental sustainability angle, I think OP can make something happen from this reptile business.
Yeah. Just building on that, one of the most successful, interesting, and liked characters of my MBA program works at one of the well-known tobacco firms. Did before the MBA and does now. There is a pragmatism in the business school world that these things are sort of understood, and not that necessarily there's a parallel between reptile breeding and cigarettes, but I think you get the point. Okay, excellent. So I think hopefully what we've done there is given a cautiously optimistic and constructive perspective of this profile. I'd like to highlight some of the consultants gassing up this guy in the comments. I was blown away by this. Never seen somebody, John, with a 2.8 GPA getting as much positive feedback as this guy's getting in the comments. So I think the takeaway or my final message on this is, OP, you've got work to do. You've got work to do. You have got a chance at these schools, but don't underestimate just how much work is involved in doing that. Let's talk about next profile.
All right.
Right. Do I have a shot at HBS, Stanford? Friend who went to Stanford, non-MBA, says my app isn't good enough. Oof, okay. Why do you need friends? Why need enemies if you've got friends like that? I think that's the same. Asian male, 5 years of work experience, corporate VC arm, and 3 out of 5 at a private fund. 710 on the GMAT, meh. 3.71 GPA from a T20 school. Board observer at a Series A startup. Guest lecturer, entrepreneurship programming. My friend who went to Stanford for a non-master's MBA program told me I don't have a unique story. He thinks I'm run-of-the-mill for HBS and Stanford. My mindset right now is I'll only do an MBA if I can swing Harvard, Stanford, yawn, or get a sizable scholarship at a T10 school. Anyone have any thoughts? I'm inclined to agree with OP's friend. What about you, John?
We all need a friend like OP's friend, tell it like it is. But OP's friend, as OP has astutely pointed out, went to Stanford for a non-MBA master's. So OP is qualifying his, their viewpoints here. Look, I do agree, given the demographic, given the achievements, yes, it's nothing that stands out significantly. But,
Okay.
We shouldn't discount the possibility that OP may have interesting anecdotes in their life that can make for a killer essay, that can make for a killer narrative.
Do you not think his friend would know that, though?
Sure. But, you'll be surprised. Look, I worked with a candidate who, wasn't even thinking about applying to HBS or Stanford. And not many people know. Many of their of this client's close friends didn't knew that she had a neurodivergent sibling, but didn't know how much of an impact it had on her and the choices that she's made through her career, and the impact that she's forged through not only through extracurriculars, but also in the workplace, and what that spells for her future goals. And she wrote about the impact of this neurodivergent sibling on her, and it made for a very effective essay, and it got her into HBS. And so on paper, stats weren't immediately HBS and Stanford friendly, much like what we're seeing here with OP stats. But look, a 3.71 from a T20 school is not offensive. A 710 for an Asian male, yes, it's not great. Maybe, if you get it up by 20, 30 points.
Understatement.
Yeah. Well, you know me, Sam. But it's not a score that is wildly out of range, is what I'm saying. It's going to hurt him. It's going to hurt him in the academic department, but it's not going to be one that folks would say, oh man, but this GPA really sucks though. I think it's not great. But if you can work on the GMAT, and if there's a cool story in there, and if he's able to play up the fact that he cycled through a corporate VC and then worked at a private fund and had tangible impact on the lives and careers of the people who he invested in, I think that could make for a good companion to that narrative, whatever that may be. So I am cautiously optimistic. I understand the risks, but I wouldn't take OP's friend's advice to heart and not even think about applying to those schools.
Okay. So what do you think of this idea of, but if I'm not, it's only worth it for me if it's Harvard or Stanford? Or a sizable scholarship at a T10, to be fair.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think sizable can mean different things to different people. If if OP applies to a couple M7s as well and doesn't get a scholarship at a T10, a M7 admittance can always can always convince the outcomes of a T10 school to provide to give that scholarship. So there are many scenarios that can come out of this. Look, I know that Stanford at HBS or a bust is something that most folks have in mind when they're thinking of applying to an MBA program, but you never know. You never know. I think if anything, Stanford and HBS probably are willing to take more risks, and especially with folks whose academic profiles don't fit in the same tier in the same desired bucket as what M7s are looking for.
What about the scholarship prospects? Overrepresented Asian male. You see a scholarship as realistic?
I think with that 710, I think the chances are quite slim.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to come down to if I personally don't think Harvard, Stanford. Okay, so when I think about who gets into Harvard, Stanford, we've had plenty of clients get into these schools. They always have something like wow on their profile. Now, maybe OP just hasn't mentioned it in this post, or maybe it's not there. And if it's not there, I don't like Harvard, Stanford. I think the T10 school is very, very possible. Scholarship's going to be tough given the overrepresented background and the mediocre GMAT. But if you're going to get one, it's going to be by negotiating. I think, OP, you need to get admits to multiple T10 schools, maybe not initially with scholarships, but go back to those schools and say, hey, Cornell, I have an offer from NYU. Sure. What scholarships can you give me? And negotiate that process. So, for example, just to put some flesh this out, last year, our clients had about $2.4 million of scholarship money in total between them. And I reckon about half of that was negotiated money. So there really is potential to negotiate, but you're going to need multiple admits. So I think that's where OP should be focusing, on this T15 level and focusing on scholarships by applying to multiple schools.
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy.
All right, on that conclusion, let's keep going. I think we should talk about the next profile. Next profile is, am I nuts for considering an MBA? Now, John, this happens occasionally where somebody dives into our MBA thread with a goal to perhaps massage their own ego by telling everybody how much they earn. I feel like this might be a little bit of a case of that. Not much information apart from compensation is 160K. Trying to gauge if an MBA makes sense. Works, power, and utilities engineering. Since I'm just an engineer at the moment, I feel like an MBA would be helpful to move into higher up roles. Don't know if full-time makes sense for where I am in my life right now, but I feel that a part-time would be good. Now I'm second guessing it. Any thoughts? John, do you think this applicant needs an MBA?
I think the bigger question is, and this is a mistake that most people make, when they debate the whole MBA thing, the MBA is not the goal. The goal is what problems do you want to solve in 5 to 10 years? What impact do you want to have? Where do you want to be in your life? And how will an MBA facilitate that, rather than I want to get into an MBA, potentially move up in my organization? I'll tell you about a time when I interviewed a candidate for school many years ago, and I asked him, why do you want an MBA? And he literally said, because my boss told me to get one. And I will leave it at that. But I think there's not much. I don't see any ambition from this person. Clearly, earning a fairly good living. So why? I guess I'm not seeing if they came to the forum and said, look, I'm seeing an issue that I want to resolve. I'm seeing a goal that I want to reach, and I'm seeing gaps that I want to fill. And this is how an MBA will help address these things. I'm not seeing that. And I don't think, for that reason, I don't think an MBA is, I wouldn't be gagging for an MBA. Let's put it that way. And profile, am I nuts? I would just say, the profile's a little boring. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. So I wouldn't say you're nuts for considering an MBA, but I would say, and I think John agrees, if you're going to do an MBA, you need to figure out the genuine motivation for it, not just as a way to bump up your compensation. A transition to management can be nice and would be relevant. Maybe a career shift into a different sector within engineering, perhaps, might also be interesting. Maybe there's a geographic move.
Yeah.
Currently Midwest, not Chicago. Maybe you have you have a goal to move into a new geography. MBA could help with that. Whatever it is, you need to really identify a clear reason for doing the MBA that is beyond, as John says, my boss tells me so. I want to get a pay rise. Interesting. Okay. What about the question of part-time versus full-time MBA, which has been alluded to down here? What do you
Mhm.
think the value of a part-time MBA is in comparison to a full-time MBA?
I think part-time MBA tends to be more helpful for those who want to advance in their role, um, and who want to stay in their current job, continue earning their living, supporting others in their family. I think that that would make sense. If you're looking for a career shift, as you say, Sam, whether it's become a product manager in your industry, whether it's changing geographies or whether it's maybe joining an LDP, in order to set you on this leadership path, I think a full-time MBA program would make more sense. And his age definitely is more conducive for a full-time MBA program. What I've tend to see for people who pursue part-time MBA programs, that they tend to be further along in their career and a little bit older.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So actually, maybe the part-time MBA is the answer. It sounds like if he's just looking for a small, I think we're assuming we don't know for sure, but if they are aiming for a new or a slight bump up in their current company, and there are part-time MBA programs nearby, then maybe a part-time MBA would make sense.
Yeah.
You're still going to need to come up with a really clear narrative for needing it,
Yeah.
but the investment would be less, wouldn't need to quit his or her job to do so. So not nuts for considering an MBA, I think is where we're heading. We'd need a little bit more information before we could give more info than that. Okay, let's keep moving. Okay, next profile. Am I too all over the place for an MBA? Mal has tagged this in our prep as chaotic foodie. Hopefully you'll see why. Hey folks, Indian male, 23 years old, been lurking here for a while. Finally thought I'd throw my hat in the ring. Hello, sir. I'm trying to piece together my goals, my background, but it's all a bit chaotic. Quick version. Math major, somehow ended up in biotech, jumped to social impact, now obsessed with food. Worked at a research firm doing data-heavy cross-functional operations and recruitment work. Pivoted to impact-led projects, managed budgets and built teams. The name is a good Indian brand name, but might not be known geographically, internationally. Okay. Now dabbling in the food space, trying to understand what it takes to build a brand that sticks, even scribbling out plans for my own cafe, etc. John, I'm reading between the lines here. OP might be unemployed right now. Big, slightly messy post-MBA goals. Start something of my own in the education and food space. Entrepreneurship goal for someone who's unemployed. It's getting scary here. Maybe even try my hand at politics someday, because why not? Okay, fair enough. Questions. Am I trying to do too much? Is it too chaotic for a strong MBA narrative? Which schools would appreciate this kind of narrative? What kind of GMAT score do I need? Do I even have a shot at GMAT waivers? Aiming to apply SET 27, which makes sense given OP is only 23 years old, and any advice for how to frame my story so it doesn't sound like a fever dream. Okay, John, let's try and extract from all this chaos, a bit of a profile evaluation, please.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And I'm saying this from like a polite British / Midwestern way. We'll dive into the academics first. Look at the GPA is okay. the GRE is going to have to work very hard for these schools that OP is interested in. I'm thinking high 320s first cohort, ideally a 330 plus, but take anything. Professional, look, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It's kind of like, you buy like a bag of, nut mix and there's like chocolate buttons in there. I never like those. So I do
And the
appreciate
potato.
yeah.
It's such a mix.
Um, I do appreciate the mix of program management and that quantity post undergrad role, but OP is 23 years old. I don't think OP has spent that much time in each of these spheres, so I don't know how OP would be branded or positioned among admissions committee. I do think that OP is without a job currently. And that thing, about working with founders closely with founders at a food company is a little misleading. It's kind of like saying I plan to apply to Stanford GSB. I don't know whether you have that yet or not. But if you do, I think that would make the goal a lot it would be a much stronger narrative to feed. I think food CPG will make sense. Entrepreneurship is a risky goal, especially if, given how young OP is and the fact that OP is likely unemployed. So yeah, that's my concern overall with this profile. I think it's the lack of focus in their professional experience, as you alluded to, Sam, as well as those goals. I think we can find a way to weave something. I don't even know if we can, but we can try that. But over to you, Sam, first.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, let's just address those goals. So recapping or reminding everybody why these goals matter so much. For somebody who has a chaotic background, what we're going to try and do with your application is draw commonalities between all of these completely different things. For example, biotech, right? Biotech's involved, for example, in engineering healthy foods, for example, right? Then jump to social impact. Maybe the social impact is around health and healthy eating. Now obsessed with food. So again, there could be a healthy eating theme coming up in here. So, and yeah, now dabbling in the food space, looking to build a brand, seeing what it takes to build a brand that sticks, and building out plans for my own cafe. So what we're going to do is have to massage quite heavily all of these things you've done into a straight line, right? Mm-hmm. Somehow there's like a food nutrition aspect to each of these things you've done. And we can frame it as, I know about nutrition from loads of different perspectives. I know about it from a tech perspective. I know about it from a social impact perspective. I know about it from a commercial perspective. And that's why I'm best positioned for the following goal. Now, a goal that is entrepreneurship is immediately going to set off alarm bells, as John has said. Why? Because they just have no guarantee you're going to do well in entrepreneurship. You have no experience in entrepreneurship already. You have no investors. You don't even have a business idea. You're wondering about whether to make a cafe or a CPG product. Like, you have no idea. So that goal is so risky that the schools just can be careful. It might work for a longer term goal, but I think in the short term, you need to insert something that is a bit more concrete in as a short term goal. John, what could be a solid short term goal for somebody with an interest in food?
Maybe a hub of the wheel role in a relatively well-known large food company. So it can be brand manager or product marketing manager. I'm seeing that, and having been in the space myself, I think there is lots to be gleaned from a role that ties all these disparate things together from the profile. So I think that
FMCG is the obvious sector, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. They also, and we're going to come to this next, but they're also quite good rotation programs in the FMCG sector. right?
Sure.
Unilever have got one. There's a whole bunch of them that you could make the case that yeah, I've been moving around all these different areas of the food industry and sort of
Hmm.
rotated around all of these different industries because I'm really curious, I'm really open-minded, I want to learn about this whole industry, and I want to keep doing that on the rotation program at Unilever, for example, and kind of build up a more diverse profile because I realized that for my long-term goals of entrepreneurship, I'm going to need to understand all the different areas of this industry. That's starting to make sense from an adcoms perspective, I think. Okay.
I think one thing that would help it is also just getting to the bottom. Well, finding the source of that passion is going to be really important. Um, whether that's like, why is food so important to OP? Is there something that they experienced, in their personal life?
Like the last
Uh,
person had the autoimmune disease
correct,
and that
correct,
triggered
correct,
their
correct,
interest in food. We need
correct,
your version of that.
correct, exactly. I think that's going to be a really important one to start with and preface with, and that can help tie, some of these threads together.
Yeah, I really, really like it. Okay, so let's go through these questions quickly, methodically. Trying to do too much. Is this too chaotic? Short answer, yes. Find a common thread. Two, which schools would actually appreciate this kind of narrative? Okay, I would say go and do a bit of research into schools that place people into rotation programs at FMCG companies. That's going to be how you decide schools. The ones that jump to mind for me, I'm not saying you necessarily can apply to Kellogg because you haven't got a GRE, GMAT score yet. We don't. There's lots of open and question marks. But for people who have got more visibility, that Kellogg stands out. I've seen clients get into rotation programs in FMCG after Kellogg. John, you were in the food industry, or have been in the food industry at points in your career. Are there any other schools that you found were overrepresented in the food industry in FMCG?
I would say some of the Midwest schools. I would point to schools like Kellogg. I would also look at Michigan Ross. And other than those two, I think I would also look at UCLA Anderson, which is a great feeder into many top tier CPG companies, as well as potentially a Duke as well.
Good.
I've seen successes and great feeders. Look, I mean, the reality is that Kellogg is moving more towards the consulting sphere, but CPG brand management is still, it remains a stronghold for that
Right.
program. So definitely consider.
So what GMAT score does he need?
Oh, you're just cutting right through it, Sam.
Yep.
I would want to see at least 685, 695 minimum for that cohort, and to make up for that 8.3-ish CGPA. It's not the best.
Yep. Okay. Do I have a shot at GMAT waivers? I'll take this one. Forget about GMAT waivers, OP. You've got enough to worry about here without having to write and worry about GMAT waivers as well. Get your good GMAT score. Use it to demonstrate your ability to stick at something, right? Because right now that's a question mark, and forget about GMAT waivers. If I'm applying SEP 27, what kind of roles can I aim for in the next year? So this is kind of where I got that unemployment guess from. I would say anything that leads towards that FMCG leadership development program would be beneficial. Anything that gives you exposure to a large FMCG company would be beneficial from a networking perspective, from an understanding how those companies function perspective. Any other kind of short-term pre-MBA roles you think, John, that jump to mind? Set somebody up for a product marketing manager role?
Any kind of, I think that it's a mix. I mean, it's a mixed bag of things. I'm looking at anything ranging from, pure play marketing roles to perhaps, an operations role of some kind. I think the beauty of going into a function like brand management is that you can go at it from different career spheres. But I think having some kind of a marketing or operations role would set OP up for the most success at a CPG
Nice.
brand management. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'm aligned. Okay, and then finally, the advice for how to frame the story. I think I said this before. Try and find that commonality between these areas, and perhaps from a nutrition perspective, use a story to explain where that passion has come from, and then set up a short-term goal that is directly linked to that passion and that theme, and then you're onto something. John, next profile.
All right.
Profile number 5, last profile of the day before we move into the bonus questions. An interesting one here. 27-year-old male, undergrad 3.3, chemical engineer, 740 GMAT, worked as a process engineer in aerospace and defense. But John, here's where things get exciting. A radioactive waste management engineer. What? Working in nuclear energy. 2.5 years of experience, will be about 4.5 at matriculation. Goals. I've done co-ops in water treatment and have this clear like environmental narrative going on. Looking to pivot into strategy consulting. Another applicant looking to pivot into strategy consulting, but specializing in sustainability, which is nice. Need opinions on whether to determine if a top T20, T15, T25 school would be possible. Considering LBS, but lack of international experience. Extracurriculars also focused on this nuclear background, which looks like it might be the basis for a narrative there. Looking for suggestions on which schools to apply to and how to improve profile. Okay, John, profile evaluation. How do you see these academics?
I like the profile overall. Look, that GPA is a little bit lukewarm, but a 740 does help, and I would obviously be prepared to explain, the discrepancy between your GPA and the GMAT in an optional essay. Professionally, I think that radioactive waste management role is very differentiated and very interesting. It's kind of, in some ways, unsexy, but sexy at the same time. It's sort of like this trend nowadays of all these PEs investing in HVAC businesses. It kind of strikes me as this is a critical industry. This is why I care about it, and this is why you should care too. So, provide an OP spotlight, spotlights how interesting it is, and it could be a strong sell to AdCom, especially coupled with, their prior experience in nuclear, in aerospace and defense, more specifically. The goal, the demographic, beyond being Canadian, I think it's nothing that stands out way too much. And the goals, look, are a little bit boring for me. I think this is a real opportunity to go beyond the cookie cutter. I want to work in consulting, to maybe focus on, if OP were to focus on consulting, I would look at more niche consulting firms in underrepresented geographies. But I think this is an opportunity for OP to consider maybe LDPs at companies like, the aerospace companies or maybe like a BP. There's so many different directions that OP can go into and build, his industry and functional experience there. I don't know enough about the space to be able to give specific recommendations, but I know enough to say that if you're just going to pick consulting, you're selling yourself short.
I'm aligned to some extent on that. So if I remember correctly, Lockheed Martin, for example, that's an aerospace and defense company that have a leadership development program. It could be a nice post MBA role, although aerospace and defense doesn't really seem to be where I think OP stands out. I think this environmental solutions angle is nice. Look, I did a quick search of this, and I found this. I did a quick Google, and I just Googled McKinsey waste management, and they've got this whole rethinking recycling narrative. This is just an article that they put out about it. But I think if you were to take sustainability consulting specifically and really narrow down on the nuclear sustainability side, I think there's still a potential to differentiate yourself, OP, from other the boring consulting goal people that John is referring to here. There is an opportunity to maybe make that stand out. Other options include potentially focusing on companies that are involved in waste management technology. Now, neither John nor I are experts in nuclear waste recycling, but I bet there are some companies that are focused on that. In fact, I'm sure there are. And I'm imagining like a corporate strategy role at one of those companies would be a really nice goal that lets you write about your work experience in nuclear waste management, lets you write about your extracurricular work in nuclear as well. As I've said before, you don't have to go into that after the MBA, right? Apply to McKinsey, do whatever you want while you're doing your MBA. We just need to get you into the program. As far as narratives go, something like a corporate strategy at a nuclear waste management technology company, or even a company that are just moving nuclear waste, that could be interesting and certainly something I've never seen before. And I think the schools therefore would be intrigued by. John, do you want to build on that?
I agree. I like that angle. I like that you brought up, the waste, the waste management capability within McKinsey, and I suspect there are other companies that have that too. I just think in order for OP to truly embrace this space, it shouldn't just be I want to work in McKinsey and I'm going to find a niche thing within there that will get me in there. I think absolutely makes sense for OP to mention a growing space within top management and consulting firms like McKinsey, i.e. that capability, and there are opportunities for him to explore other areas as well. I think that industry should be the focus, and maybe the function can be secondary to it.
Yeah, I've just done a quick Google for nuclear waste management companies. Right, let me show you this. So this, to me, would be a really good place to start. Strategic work at one of these companies would be a really unique narrative that business schools have not seen much, if at all. That's how you're going to stand out, OP. Way more unique than saying I'm going to go to McKinsey. Even if you do apply to McKinsey, I think this is the way to approach it. And particularly if you can demonstrate like a particular challenge that these companies are facing. I'm imagining, for example, like in my work, I encountered the following challenge, and I tell the story of how they bumped up against an issue. My mission is to eradicate this challenge so that we can use more clean energy, so that nuclear can grow and we can generate more clean nuclear energy. I'm going to join Orano as a corporate strategist to expand their presence in this particular area. However, for that, I need an MBA because I don't have any financial analysis skills just yet. I don't know strategic thinking. And so I'm going to take the consulting classes or the strategic thinking classes with the MBA. And that narrative would really, really resonate. And I think, frankly, OP, if you can do that, you do that nicely. I think talking about target schools, I think you could do. I think you're in a really, really strong bucket. I do think you should be targeting LBS. There's no guarantees, but I do think LBS would consider your profile strongly. By the way, you might want to tailor your goals to European or British companies if you're going to for the LBS application, but still really nice. I think the T25 and T15s that are a no-brainer, and I think you've got to throw a couple of M7 applications in there for kicks. Do you agree, John?
I agree. I think that's a good plan.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on to the bonus question today, which is a bit less formal than we usually discuss. Question is, why is cheating, including spousal infidelity, so widespread in MBA programs? Okay, no profile evaluation whatsoever here. So let me dive right in with a bit of anecdotal experience to kind of back up this question. So the OP is asking, is a second year at a T15, confirm that cheating is very common on campus. People in non-open monogamous relationships are hooking up, keeping partners in the dark. At least 3 marriages in the school have fallen apart. I personally witnessed guys with girlfriends go on boys' nights, and apparently the girls do the same. Yes, long distance relationships from before the MBA often don't last. And the turkey drop after the first Thanksgiving break is real. But most of these people still have the decency to first break up with their SO before pursuing someone else. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about classmates who are still together and cheating, actively cheating. Of course, it's a minority. The married but available stereotype for MBAs seems to be true. I haven't heard it be this bad in JD or MD programs. Okay. And then there's this perception among people that are having this sort of behaving in this way seem to be treated as fun. John, is first question then, in your experience at Berkeley Haas, is this overall perception true?
I would say it's not false, Sam.
Okay.
Is my MBA way of saying this. I think, I've seen this in action. The variation of married but available is, I had, one of my classmates was asked if he was single, and he was married, but and international. He says, I'm single in Berkeley. So it's one way to spin it. But it's a tough environment. Look, I mean, you're in the fun field environment with lots of people having fun together, and you're not in an environment where you have you're faced with a boatload of academic things to wolf down, as in med school or law school. So it's a very tempting environment to practice infidelity.
Is it worse than, well, I worked in banking, and I saw this during my MBA, and having come from banking, I was not surprised in the slightest. It was sort of a continuation of what I'd seen in banking. So there's two ways of looking at this. On the one hand, yes, there are, as a result of this kind of behavior, there's a lot of divorces that happen during the MBA program. We had, at least a couple, but there's also a lot of people who end up getting married. They meet their partners during the MBA. Now, whether they were married, they were in a relationship beforehand, not sure. But they meet their partners during an MBA. That is a huge thing. Just anecdotally, so there's about 350 people in my MBA program, and there was at least half a dozen weddings between people on the program after the program. At least a dozen people from the program got married. So yes, there is the sort of the divorces is the one side of it, but there's also the people who hook up and stay together. Anecdotally, I kind of sort of preempted this a little bit, and actually I actually broke up with my girlfriend before the start of the MBA, sort of half expecting that antics were going to be there, and thought I'd rather be single for this, and I think it was the right thing to do. John, you and I are by no means relationship advisors, and we are far out of our depth here. But I would just say that yes, it is a thing. But that doesn't mean that if an individual or a couple went into the MBA that they can't stay together during the process. Mm-hmm. You could argue that the MBA is a test of the relationship, and several people here in this case have failed.
Yeah, that's one way to position it, Sam. And as admission coaches, it is also our duty to point out the programs that are great for partners. And from what I've heard, Tuck and Kellogg are excellent at, folks who bring their partners into programs. There are cases where, many cases where not only they have partners clubs, but they also allow in Kellogg the terminology is called JV. They allow their JVs to run some of these clubs, and in some cases become more involved on campus than the students themselves. So yeah, that's one way to spin this.
So let's dip our toes into this as relationship advisors. If you were to go to an MBA and you have a partner and you're absolutely determined to stay with that partner, tell me what the MBA experience would look like. What do you do to ensure maximum chances of that relationship staying together in terms of like moving together and stuff like that?
involving the partner in friend groups, right? Giving space to the partner. Again, this is speaking hypothetical, Sam. We're not relationship advisors here, but having the opportunity for each other to have their own space, and then also opportunities to come together and involving each other in key activities. I think that's gonna help provide both a shared commitment in something, as well as breathing room, which is something that you need when you not only network with others, but also just go off and have fun, but not too much fun.
So bring them with you on the MBA. That's the first thing that you're saying. So
Yep.
bring them. So rather than trying to do a long distance, right? Bring them with you.
Mhm.
There's only one person in the relationship that is doing an MBA. Bring the partner along. Make that partner part of the application process. So they have a say in the schools that you're applying to and involved with. On the MBA, introduce them to friends, but also crucially, partners clubs are a big thing.
Yep.
There is also opportunities, I believe, at some schools for partners to attend some classes as well.
Yep.
So they might also be able to develop professionally themselves. And I think those are the things that I can see. So if a couple were to go and do an MBA and they take those sorts of steps, there is plenty of couples that survive MBAs as well. Right. We can breathe again now, John. We're back in, not out of our depth quite so much. Okay. John, it's really nice to see you again. Really good roast today. If you watch this and you would like to have your profile roasted, feel free to send it over, either send us DMs on Reddit, or you can contact us at samweeks.com for a conversation, and we will talk to you about what admissions consulting looks like, about your profile in a bit more depth. Now is the time to meet admissions consultants. We're currently in April. So if you're applying in round 1 next year, now's the time to get into that. Okay, last point, John. Final thing, just a throwaway one. Reddit is well known for its slightly outlandish posts occasionally, and we've got a great one here. Should we force MBAs to do manual labor? So the post is about how disconnected MBA programs have become from the nature of real work. We have so many young consultants who walk into a warehouse and confidently suggest new layouts without understanding how it's going to affect people's knees. Should we institute 6 to 12 months field immersion requirement for graduation? You shouldn't be allowed to manage anyone if you've never had to clock in. I love this. John, do you think MBAs are so disconnected from the real world? And if so, is this really the way to tackle it?
I get where OP is coming from. This is well-intentioned, and I completely agree with some of these grievances. How can you develop empathy when when you haven't had this lived-in experience, of managing these people in the first place, of having experienced what these folks you're managing have gone through themselves. But what I will say is that an MBA is an expensive investment, both in terms of time and money. To mandate someone spend 6 to 12 months of doing manual labor, which probably won't pay all too much, and then say, okay, you're going to be $250,000 in debt. How do you feel about that? I think that's a hard sell. And I think business schools already do a pretty good job of selecting people, many of whom may have experience or have had exposure to manual labor in some shape or form. I mean, I've had my fair share of manual labor summer jobs when I was in high school and early on in college. And there are others who have, spent longer time doing these things. I think if you were to encounter a classroom of 80 people, I'm sure there are a ton of these who have had the experience, have gone through the experience already. So I think, yes and no. I think schools should be mindful that this is a thing, but I don't think I don't think this mandate is going to be a realistic expectation for people who are looking to, again, sink their time and money into an expensive endeavor.
I love it. I was a cook to pay for my undergrad. I was scrubbing dishes, getting shouted at. And I'm not going to lie, I think it really helped me get into investment banking, or at least survive in investment banking, because I was used to getting shouted at. I was used to working late. I was used to starting early, whatever. It wasn't, it just, investment banking was just as, was sort of the same stress, but with a suit on. I empathize with this, with the sentiment behind this point. I do think there's value to it. 6 months is probably excessive. What about like a month, or even just like a 2-week stint? You probably learn most of what you need to learn from a 2-week stint. You have to do 12 months of it. Anyway, bit tongue in cheek there, but I'm glad we touched on it. So, John, lovely to see you again, as usual. Anybody watching, if you would like to have your profile evaluated by John and I, if you're looking to hire a consultant, John and I are working with applicants in round 1 this coming cycle. Get in touch. samweeks.com is the website. You can book a meeting. Top right-hand corner of the screen, there is a schedule a meeting. You're going to be asked to submit your information, your resume, your GPA, all of this stuff. And we obviously work with people who are serious about MBA applications. We're not just going to speak to anybody about doing manual labor. Get in touch if you're serious. John, great to see you again. Look forward to next week.
Likewise. Thank you, Sam.
Take care. See ya.